Shabbat Shalom. There is a puzzle to be undone. We find in this week's Torah portion and next week's the continuation of the actual construction of the Mishkan, which we heard about 3 and 4 weeks prior, or 2 and 3 weeks prior. Sorry, I need to work on my math. And the Mishkan was understood as being a symbol of peace, not only for the Jewish people, but for the entire world. There are teachings that say at the Mishkan and its successor, the Temple of Jerusalem, sacrifices were offered not only on behalf of our nation and citizens, but on behalf of all of the nations of the world. But how exactly was that supposed to work? How does a Mishkan and all of its implements, how does the temple stand for all? Surely it is a uniquely Jewish institution. Surely it is a private institution. We did not allow even the average Jew into the Holy of Holy Place. Certainly we were not allowing strangers either. How could this construction have an impact beyond a very small number of people? Well, there are many different aspects of the Mishkan, but I want to focus on one, which is perhaps the most famous outside of the temple itself, and that is the Aron, the Ark of the Covenant. Many people I know didn't really know about the Ark of the Covenant before Raiders of the Lost Ark, but thankfully Steven Spielberg raised awareness on this amazing part of the tabernacle. And on the top of the tabernacle are 2 cherubim, are 2 cherubs. If you want to know more about what a cherub actually is, you can check out my YouTube on the Wednesday class. But what was important for tonight's discussion is the posture of those 2 cherubim, of those 2 cherubs. Because it says in the text, in all of its vagueness, that the 2 were facing towards each other on the lid, with their arms, and their wings lifted upwards, and their faces to each other, and yet also facing down. Up, forward, and down. That is the posture you need to have in mind. Wings stretching upwards, faces forward, and also looking down. All 3 of these elements are essential for understanding what they are meant to represent, and through the representation, how the Mishkan was meant to guide and help establish a peaceful world. The wings going up, says Abarbanel, the great medieval commentator, the wings going up are perhaps the most obvious. Since the beginning of time, human beings have conceived of God as being in a upwards realm, heaven as somehow being connected up. It's not because it's actually up geographically, right? We've been up there and we haven't bumped into anything yet, but simply as an emotional, philosophical, psychological tendency among humans around the world, upwards does seem elevated and as such has been associated with the divine. The raised wings of the Melachim, these angels, are meant to remind us to reach upwards towards God, to connect with God, to find in God guidance for our life, guidance for understanding our purpose, and how we must look at our own existence. Beautiful, but incomplete. Because Judaism does not ask us to detach ourselves from this world. Judaism does not say, go and sit in a monastery and contemplate you and God's relationship, to isolate yourself from all that is earthly and allow your spirit to ascend and never return. Judaism says quite the opposite. Yes, during the Amidah, Kadosh, 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 we go up on our toes as though we are taking our place among the heavenly host, but we also come down. And we immediately remind ourselves that God's glory is in all of the world, not only in the heaven above. And how do these angels on the ark tell us that? They tell us that by looking at each other. Judaism does not ask us to turn our backs on others. It does not ask us to isolate ourselves from others. It demands that we actually engage with other human beings, which is the greatest challenge you'll ever have. Being holy and spiritual all on your own is a cakewalk. Being holy and spiritual when the person you're looking at is annoying you, that's a challenge. But that's the challenge that God has called upon us to do. To find spirituality and to find meaning in those most human of relationships. But how do we do that without growing furious or exhausted or losing ourselves in all of the hubbub? How do we actually manage that? What were the angels looking down upon? What were they standing upon? The lid to the ark. And what was inside the ark? The tablets, the law, Torah, the Brit, the covenant, the guidance that God gave us of how to actually navigate this world around us. Both how to navigate the vertical connections, as it were, between us and God, and the horizontal connections between us and others. God did not expect us to stumble through this world on our own, groping in the dark, unsure of how to actually live in a way that would be harmonious and peaceful within ourselves and between ourselves. God gave us a guidebook. He didn't drop us in this random earthly existence and say, figure it out. He dropped us here and said, here are some of the wonderful things you should be aware of as you go about this little tourist tour of this earthly existence, and this will help you actually do it well. This will bring you shalom. And indeed, historically, it has been true. The more we are willing to acknowledge that there is a force, a power, an idea that can guide us towards each other and towards it, and the more we allow ourselves to be guided by that in a way that reinforces the compassion, the justice, and the beauty that God has put into this world, the more peace that we have. Because the fundamental problem with every human society is once I get past maybe my family, some people never get past themselves, we call them narcissists, but once we get past our family, how do I relate? How do I care about anyone else outside of my circle? How can I possibly bridge that gap? They are just another face in the crowd. They are just another blob in the world. Maybe they are helpful to me, maybe they are a hindrance to me, but they are ultimately nothing to me. Until you recognize that they are another expression of the same God that we have reached up to. Like bouncing a beam off a satellite down to another place on earth, by reaching up towards God, we are able to connect the person standing next to us better. And by reaching down to the law and connecting to it, we know then what to do. And the more that we follow this path, the more we recognize the divinity in another and the guidance of God of how to respond to that divinity, the more peace we create. By having the Mishkan in the world, and then later the temple, by having this symbol in the ark, and all that Judaism has tried to shout to the world, we have succeeded in bringing more peace and more structure. Societies now house hundreds of millions of people, and by sharing and understanding, they are able to coexist in remarkable ways. Not perfectly, as we know, but more than ever before in history. It's not easy. Sometimes people make mistakes. But if we remember to reach up, to reach out, and to reach down, we can continue to build towards peace. We, each individual, are an opportunity, a torch, a light that can shine of how to bring that peace into the world. And no matter how much darkness there may be, never forget the power you have to push it back. Shabbat Shalom.